into it, I'll just pass it over to Kel for a welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Just welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking your time. Jason, you're really quick to point out the amount of work that's going on in the background by our members. I would really like to recognize the work done by Jason and staff and the CSA. It has taken a lot to get us to this stage. And when we consider the fact that we are one of the two first provinces in the country to roll this out, it's a really feather in our cap. We know there's lots of challenges. We also know that you're getting a lot of pressures from our members to get out there and playing the game in a full format. But we have to be patient because we have people who are above us who are telling us what to do. And we're certainly cognizant of the fact that health are the people who are guiding us right now through this pandemic. So, but don't forget, anything I can do, please feel free to reach out. And know the same thing applies to Jason too and staff. So folks, I hope you have a lot of good questions, and I hope you get the information you need from this session. And thank you for hosting this. Carry on, Jason.
Great, thank you, Keld. Ryan, maybe just want to go over any of the housekeeping stuff?
Of course. Thanks everyone for attending. We've received all of your questions, and we found that there was a bit of an overlap with a lot of the questions. So Jason is going to go through and speak on them, and then afterwards, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. We won't allow people to unmute throughout the webinar, but at the end, if you go to the bottom right hand of the screen, you can raise your hand, and then if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you so that you can ask your question. And I think that's it, Jason.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So just to let everybody know, as Ryan kind of alluded to, a lot of the questions that came in were overlapping, obviously understandable. So we kind of grouped them into, I think, 7 different sections. So just to let everybody know, I'll run through the sections that we're going to kind of cover. So insurance and exclusion and waiver kind of covers one area. Other area is the mass gathering limits. There's questions around that and confusion, a little bit of confusion on that. Some of it is around health testing and Canada Soccer's assessment tool. Other questions are related to age group participation and player to coach ratios, goalkeeper training and handling the ball, and then future phases and league play type things and financial pieces as well. So those are the areas that we're going to cover off, and we are going to try and be respectful of everyone's time to keep to the hour, but obviously answer any questions that may come up as we go through. And then also, as we mentioned in the past, if there is things that are specific to your organization, your club, your location, more than happy to have one-on-one conversations to try and help navigate through this and do the best that we can. So on that, the first one is the insurance piece. And I know we've been communicating a lot around risk and the insurance and liability challenges that we've been experiencing. Yesterday, we were able to circulate some positive news from the government of BC, who has extended an order or signed an order to extend liability coverage specifically to nonprofit organizations in BC across all of the amateur sports sector, which includes a large percentage of our clubs and member organizations, which is positive. We have got questions from some of our members who are not nonprofits, and we've reached out to ViaSport to get some clarity on that, and they're going to be we haven't got a response yet, but we will, and we'll be able to share that information. Right now, based on the order that we've seen, it is solely for nonprofits, but we're gathering more information as we can on that. The other thing to be aware of with regard to this extension of coverage is it's only while we're in a state of emergency that BC is in right now. And on that note, this is the longest in history that we've been under a state of emergency in BC. Right now, it carries to June 23rd. However, they're only able to extend the emergency state every 2 weeks at a time. And the conversations that we've had with ViaSport is that there's no kind of timeline for when they're going to stop that state. So they're anticipating that this will carry on at least through the summer, which does give us some assurances as we gradually return to the fields under this initial phases of play. And depending on how things progress as we move to hopefully future phases too. So that gives us added assurance from a government perspective right now, which is good. We're still also exploring with our insurance broker what coverage could potentially be available. So just because we have got that from the government doesn't mean that we're going to stop those conversations with our broker. We don't know any timelines around that. We don't know costs associated with it, and we don't know coverage yet. But from what the broker's been saying to us is they're quietly optimistic that in time we'll be able to have some underwriter come forward and see it as an opportunity to protect us. But we just don't know the details of what that looks like yet. So as we get more information there, granted, we'll have to speak to our board at BC Soccer, but then also share it out with our members and organizations as well. So we know the importance on the liability coverage is really, really key for us. Another question we got was around the insurance and if the exclusion is solely just for COVID related, and what about all of our other insurance? All of our other insurance is intact and still in play, so don't have to worry about any of that stuff. The exclusion solely rests as it outlines in the exclusion notice that we received and shared with everybody. Another question specifically around waivers was, do you still recommend using the waivers that we updated? And yes, we still do recommend those waivers be used. It just provides added coverage to mitigate risk, and it helps protect everyone at all levels: Canada Soccer, BC Soccer, all of our districts, clubs, the coaches, individuals within. So we do recommend that those waivers are still being used. So that was the questions we had with regard to insurance. Next, we'll move on to the mass gathering limits. And right now, as everyone's aware, we're under the order of 50 or less in British Columbia. I know other provinces have been different, and some of them are increasing now to 50, which is good for those jurisdictions. But ours has been 50 for a long time. What we've been able to put in our plan is 50 people inside the 11v11 soccer field. But the key piece here is it's also with what the municipality and what the city allows. So that's why we wrote it the way that we did, is we said, unless otherwise stated by the municipality or city, it's 50 inside the borders of 11v11 soccer field. So if a municipality, they could increase that number or they could lower that number. And we're okay with that. That falls in line with our guidelines because it's their facility. And if they think that if their field is big enough and they can accommodate 60 people, we're okay with that. And that's how our guidelines have been written. But if it's not stated anywhere, we've said 50, but we need to make sure that we're adhering to the distancing measures that are in place right now. We know that there was confusion on a call, ViaSport call with the BC Parks and Recs Association, specifically around the number of people that are allowed on a soccer field. And the important thing from our perspective is to make sure that all of our clubs and members are working with their local municipalities on the fields that they're going to be on, because ultimately those groups are going to be the ones that determine what's acceptable and what's not on their fields. So if it's not stated, we've landed on, with support from Canada Soccer and ViaSport, on 50 on a field, but that does not include the surrounding areas of the field. If there's any parents or there that are watching soccer activity, need to make sure that they're adhering to the physical distancing requirements that the government is laying out right now. But our 50 limit is solely within the lines and touch lines of the football field or soccer field. So those were the only questions that we had in that area. I'll move on to the next is around kind of the health testing and CSA assessment tool. So the questions that we got in this area were around mandatory testing for coaches and players. Do we need to wear masks? Has there been any positive COVID tests for players, registered players or registered coaches? The CSA assessment tool references temperature checks. Do we need to do that? And then is the CSA assessment tool guidance or a pass-fail type tool? So currently, there's no requirement for mandatory testing. As you can see in the plan that we've rolled out, which is the guidance we've got from ViaSport as well and the health authorities, is there is the requirement for a daily verbal confirmation from individuals that they're not displaying symptoms. So that's a check that we have. Masks are currently not required. in our return to play plan. But if members do want to put masks in place, they can if they want. And also taking that one step further, if individuals that are going to be participating in soccer want to, they can. So it's not a requirement, but at every level, they could make the determination they do want to use it, and then the players themselves could want to use it, and that could be allowed. We're not aware of any registered players or coaches being having tested positive right now, and we don't really have a mechanism right now for that information to be reported into us, but we're not aware of any right now. So yes, Canada Soccer's assessment tool does reference temperature checks. It's not a requirement in the return to play plan. And CSA's assessment tool is, it's a self-assessment guidance tool. It's not a pass-fail. And maybe I'll ask Earl to maybe make a comment on the assessment tool.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. You're absolutely right. The tool was designed for clubs and organizations to self-assess, self-evaluate, just get a good sense of where you were post creation of your plan, right? To kind of use your plan, go through the assessment tool with your plan alongside it. And if there were one or two additional bits of mitigation that the tool sparked in you, it would just help to further drive down risk, further mitigate some of the concerns around contagion.
Great, thanks, Earl. The other important piece with regard to the assessment tool from Canada Soccer is organizations and clubs, you can use it as many times as you want. So if you do an assessment, if you do your assessment and it comes back as moderate or whatever it is, and then you go away and take further action and further steps, you can go back and revisit that assessment tool to get a updated rating based on the work that you guys are doing at the local levels. So that's there for you to use as many times as you want, I think. Is that right, Earl?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would suggest that if your response comes back, and I know I've seen significant numbers of responses come back from the clubs who've been using the tool. If the response comes back and you land in the moderate zone, my suggestion is you're probably not doing enough to further mitigate, right? Either you haven't integrated BC's plan well enough into your existing plan, and that most clubs should find themselves in the low to very low. So my suggestion would be to take what you've got, look at some of the suggestions as to mitigation, re-look at the BC plan to how you could further integrate that into your existing plan. And I think you'll find that exercise will help to drive the mitigation down to a low or very low. I think what some clubs have done, and I think this is valuable, this is a valuable exercise, is they've gone through it just to see the tool and to get some ideas about mitigation or where they kind of currently stand. Then they've gone away, fully implemented a plan, and then sort of gone back into the tool just to see what that plan has done to the mitigation, which is valuable. I think both are good. So you're right. You can go back and use the tools often as you like to kind of further drive down the risk.
Great, thanks, thanks, Earl. I think that was all that we had in that section. So now I'm going to pass it over to come on more the technical side of kind of on-field stuff, and that was asked. So I'll pass it over to Chris to comment there.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. So there were some specific questions that were asked, which covered age group and parents, with groups that are working with U9 and below. So one of the Canada Soccer Technical Committee considerations was a parent to be present with the player. Just to clarify, that is a consideration and it's not mandatory. So it's at the club's discretion if they want to use that option or not. There's also questions around player to coach ratio. Some of the examples we gave was a 2 to 10 ratio with the example session plans. They were just examples, and again, not mandatory. So it's down to the club's discretion, and just making sure the rule of 2 is considered. And you know, from regular training practice, it would probably be following that as a standard process. But again, clubs can expand on the coaches if they feel they need to. Goalkeeper training. There are opportunities for goalkeeper training to take place on the field. There was some questions around sharing of equipment, i.e. gloves, and the recommendation is obviously sharing gloves shouldn't happen. So goalkeepers should be keeping their own gloves on, and there should just be, as best as possible, a minimal sharing of equipment, water bottles, example, off the field. That then leads into ball handling, and there are some restrictions around ball handling, although other sports haven't necessarily got that in place. We've gone with phase one and really gone with precautions suggested by ViaSport and Canada Soccer. So it's trying to limit the ball to below the waist and not higher, and trying to have sessions that don't necessarily encourage heading and handling from a on-field player rather than just the goalkeepers. Those were the specific items that came up, as Ryan mentioned, with questions. As it's technical, I'll just pass it over to Jason DeVos with Canada Soccer to see if there's anything you'd like to add, Jason, as you're on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I think the only message I would give is this isn't a race. You know, I think the messaging that Earl and I have been delivering on all of the webinars and video conferences that we've been on is that, you know, we want to ensure that the resumption of soccer activities is done in the safest possible manner. And it will take time and it will take patience for people to adapt to some of the recommendations. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and connect with the staff from BC Soccer, who will in turn contact us, and we can certainly provide some guidance. It is really about taking into consideration what's in the best interest of the player. I'll just touch on the parent, guardian, sibling concept. It's very difficult to put a hard age on when children can understand the concept of social distancing. Those of you who are parents will know that even your own children at different ages will have different cognitive abilities in terms of that type of an instruction. So if you're going to be utilizing parents, guardians, or siblings in the training session itself, that might help mitigate some of that, where young players will be wandering off chasing balls and not really being able to focus. So these are just some of the considerations that you need to keep in mind as you're starting your programming up again. But again, I'll just reiterate, if you have questions, if you're looking for resources, if you need help, don't hesitate to send an email to Chris or to Jason. They will in turn contact us and we'll be able to provide some assistance in that space.
Great, thanks, Jason. Thank you, Chris, for that. Moving on to the next question, which is a lot of the questions that we got is the future phases and league play and games, and we want to get back at it. And if school's potentially back in September, how come we can't get back on the soccer fields? And our cases are really low and all that stuff. And what I do want to say is that we're in the same position as everyone. We want to get back on the fields just as much as everybody else. So some of the questions here were just that around league play and competitive matches. What if the whole season's canceled next year? What are we going to do? What should clubs do? Or is there any guidance that we're going to be providing to clubs around budgeting and affiliation fees and those types of things? So currently we're in phase one of a 3-phase that we've rolled out or that we're going to be rolling out here in BC. We're going to be able to move as quickly as responsible and align with our health authorities and what ViaSport allows us to do, and obviously what Canada Soccer is in support of as well. So we know what it's going to look like in the short term, which is very different and very strange from what we've experienced in the past. But from the sport activity chart that ViaSport has put out there, the phase that we're in right now started May the 19th and carries us until September. However, in the conversations we have with them and Heather specifically, is that could change based on health authorities and changes at their level, based on how things progress as the province gets kind of reopened again. So we're hopeful that in the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks, we'll get more information on what we'll be able to do on a gradually expanding. And our initial discussions from a soccer perspective is what we've been talking about is perhaps we're able to move to introducing limited contact in training in the first instance, moving to phase 2, then progressing to small-sided game environments, and then beyond that, progressing to back into more regular type soccer activity. That's what we think is reasonable and responsible. And early indications from ViaSport is that's reasonable and responsible as well. However, they do need to go back and talk to the health authorities. But the one thing is we have no indication on when we'll be able to implement that sort of a gradual phased-in approach. So we're waiting for that information to come back. If we are able to move in that direction, obviously we'll communicate as quickly as we can on that. We still may be under the order of 50 people or less. We still may also be in a situation where non-essential travel is not encouraged, and putting people on buses and moving across the province may not be something that is supported. So we may be able to get back to some form of gameplay, but it still may look a bit different from a league and competition structure. So we need to work with the members and the league managers to make sure that we're being as responsible as we can be and aligning with what the health authorities in ViaSport are allowing us to do as we're able to move to the next phases. From a fee perspective, I can't really comment specifically right now from a BC Soccer level because it's currently with our finance committee and ultimately with our board. So as things change in that regard, we'll be able to share information. What I can say is, which is fairly obvious, is if people aren't registering to play soccer, there's not fees being collected. So that's happening right now. So from a guidance to clubs on managing budgets, it's a great question. It's very tricky and challenging for us to answer that because all clubs kind of operate differently. Some operate very similarly, but some clubs don't have field costs. Some do. Some have paid staff, some don't. All of them operate slightly different. So it's difficult for us to give general guidance around the budgeting process. But what we can say is under the current situation, when you are looking at this sort of stuff, be mindful that, as we all have been, people have been financially impacted by the current situation, and we don't know what people will be able to afford when coming out of this as far as soccer-related activity. And I'm talking about not just league fees, but there's the add-on programs and all that great stuff that we do to support players and player development. It may look slightly different because people may not be able to afford it. We don't know what that looks like yet. One of the things that we're doing here, and we've alluded to it previously with our partners at Kids Sport, is we're trying to create a standalone initiative to target individuals and organizations that may have not been hit as negatively financially by the current situation, to see if we can raise money to help support families that do need money to get their kids back into sport and want them to get into sport, and specifically for us, obviously soccer. So we're still trying to figure out the finer details on that, and hopefully over the summer period, we'll be able to get that information out and that kind of a fundraising type initiative out to support ultimately the families, which is what we're all trying to do, is help those kids and those people get back onto the soccer fields. So I know that's a lot of information to take on board, and I think we've answered all of the questions. Again, my apologies if we've missed a couple along the way. It wasn't by intent by any means, but maybe what I'll do now, we've been about half an hour in, a lot of information, but maybe I'll pass it over to Ryan to kind of facilitate any sort of question answers that we have.
All right, thanks, Jason. Yeah, so if there are any questions after that, please use the raise hand function and I'll go down and unmute you and I'll say whose turn it is. Just in order to keep things simple, we'll start off alphabetical. Oh, it actually does raise the first hand to the top. So Jerry Menel Fretwell from Lake Hill. Here you go.
Wow, first. So the specific question is about the liability, and I think this is probably for ViaSport, but the current ministerial order does not protect municipalities. And we're getting a lot of pushback from our municipality about not issuing permits until they're protected, because their risk managers are saying they don't want to be the last stop for a lawsuit. So has there been any discussion about liability protection for the municipalities or extending the ministerial order to cover that?
Oh, yeah, I was wondering if I could unmute myself. Thanks. I'm not as familiar with what orders are or not in place for municipalities, but I did have a communication with the BC Parks and Rec Association today that indicated that there may be something similar for them. So that's something I can look into further and get the information back to Jason.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next question we have is from Jeff Clark from Surrey United.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for having us. This question is for Chris and Jason DeVos from a technical perspective. So totally agree with what's being shared in terms of coach to player ratio. Chris, you and I had a long conversation about a month ago on this, and I provided some written feedback for you. And Jason, I'll just sort of share, it kind of came up on our call a couple of weeks ago. And I understand you might not have a hard and fast type rule or checklist, but what considerations would you say a club, like to try and keep things as consistent as possible? Because I think this is collective. I think we're all in this together. And if we open it too much to a club's interpretation of what a coach can handle, or is 13 10-year-olds too much for that coach, or should it be limited to like a sliding scale of some sort? So I'm just trying to work through like our own staff and some of our own experiences. And I've even looked at like trying to create a chart of certification levels. But as you know, those courses don't really test or prepare a coach for these types of challenges because we're all going into this unknown. So I guess my question would be, could there be some better guideline to a club while leaving that interpretation and that subjectivity based on the club's resources, or maybe facilities and in their ability to consolidate? I would just sort of put that to you, please.
Chris, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I can start, Jason, and you can follow up. Yeah, again, at this moment in time, Jeff, it's at the club discretion. But again, I understand you're looking for more guidance on what that might look like. Just looking at regular practice, regular coach to squad ratio with a team environment, and then looking at what maybe an academy environment would be with what you might put down as a player to coach ratio. Those would probably still apply and be applicable. And then the discretion of the club is if they want to go beyond that to add more staff on the field because of the situation to manage players. So probably not detailed in it's a yes and a no and it has to be this, but those are the examples of what happens in regular training and academy, as you know, and that would be probably something to lean on that you can build off of. Jason, is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to give a hard and fast rule on something like this. You could have a group of 10-year-old girls that are more than comfortable, working with one coach. You might have a group of, 8 boys that are rambunctious, that are a little bit difficult to control for one person. So it may be very dependent on the individual players that you're working with, their level of maturity, their level of development. I think one of the challenges that is also faced is the level of professionalism within the club itself. So there will be clubs, I'm sure, on the call who are primarily volunteer, where they don't have a great number of staff coaches or may not have any staff coaches. So, managing a group of rambunctious kids might be difficult. Whereas someone who is working either full-time or part-time as a grassroots coach may have a little bit more experience in dealing with that. One of the guidelines that we give clubs is in the initial stages, in order to minimize contact, it may be appropriate for you to consider using your staff coaches, whether they're part-time or full-time coaches, to run the majority of the training sessions and have the other coaches who are volunteers there as assistants, in order to maintain a level of consistency in that respect. But it's really difficult, Clarky, to say, it should be 10-to-1 ratio, it should be 8-to-1 ratio, it should be 12-to-1 ratio. It's so dependent on the kids that are involved.
Yeah.
I would just say, try to use your best judgment and work with your coaches as well to ask them what they're comfortable with. They'll know their players better than you probably will as a technical director, because they work with them all the time. So if they feel that they're a little uncomfortable, they might need another assistant. That's something you might want to consider. But you also have to then bear in mind that the maximum number of people that you're allowed to have on the field. So if you're adding a coach, that may mean you need to remove a player, and you have to try and find that sweet spot. So I wish I could give you, like Chris, I wish I could give you the golden answer. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. And you're going to have to use your best judgment on this, I think.
No, and that's good. If I could, thank you, Jason. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to limit it to either staff coaches only,
Yep.
or staff and volunteer combination. Chris, to your lead in where I'm seeking guidance, I'm actually seeking a bit of security, because we have members that are quoting what's being made public, where BC Soccer's saying it's a 5-to-1 ratio. So if we run a program with a 10-to-1, say, because our coach is competent in our opinion, we just don't want to be criticized or have something held up, because your document's called Recommendations and Guidelines. So in that document, it's hard to separate what's BC Soccer saying you must do, or here's a guideline to what you should do, versus here's an idea, but it's subjective based on the club and the situation and the resources. Do you understand our position on that, right? So no, this is good. I'm happy with that answer, and we'll be able to work with it. So thank you very much.
So those were the only 2 hands that were raised. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand function. Oh, Jeremy from Lake Hill again.
Sorry, I didn't expect to be on so fast, so I didn't put my hand up right away. Much more specific question around the ball handling restrictions or guidelines. If we were to give every participant their own ball, they take it with them, they bring it back, they label it, would that mitigate some of the concerns and maybe help us relax some of those guidelines? Because in particular with the little ones, it's going to be almost impossible to keep them from touching the ball.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll jump in on this one, Jason. Our recommendation is, in the early stages, if you can do that, brilliant. If every kid can bring their own ball and it's clearly labeled and you can manage it that way, fantastic. Another alternative approach is for the club to give each player a ball that they then label themselves with their name. I mean, obviously, you'd have to deal with that, cleaning that off at a later date when the restrictions are fully lifted. But yeah, I think the concept of the early stages of training being individual skill work, one player, one ball, not sharing equipment, not sharing the ball, would be the safest thing to do. And Earl, by all means, jump in here if I'm getting any of this wrong. But the reason that we've made recommendations around not handling the ball is simply in line with the provincial health authority's guidance on things like this. So the less contact that we can have with multiple surfaces, the better. Ideally, they are only using the ball and transmitting the ball with their feet and their thighs. And when we recommend below the waist in the early stages. So, I think you're on the right track, Jeremy, with that train of thought is around one player, one ball. And if they can keep that ball and obviously take it home, clean it before they leave the field using the appropriate measures and sanitization processes, then I think you're in the right track.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, we have Stuart Ince with North Vancouver. Stuart, you'll just have to press unmute before you start speaking.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks everyone for putting this on. Jason, this question for you. I'm paraphrasing now, but I think this is what you said. You said with regard to affiliation fees, you said if people aren't registering, then fees aren't being collected. That's happening right now. But there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of registrations that have already happened. And so I wonder if you could just give some clarification on the question of affiliation fees, maybe the CSA, will the CSA, when will that process be happening? When will they be asking you to forward affiliation fees? When will you be asking the districts? And when will the districts be asking us?
Great question, Stuart. So yes, you're right. There's registrations happening right now at the local levels of the clubs, and those that have been proactive especially those leading into the coastal season, because we all hope to be back to regular type coastal season. So my comment wasn't related to that. It was more so around, as an example, this situation hit and we weren't able to run the interior season. So all of our members outside the Lower Mainland and island area, the coastal region, even if they did their registration, they were refunding all their money back to the registrants, and BC Soccer wasn't collecting obviously a fee from those groups. That would be a similar situation if we're not able to run the coastal season this year. If the season's not running, we wouldn't be collecting fees. So that's to clarify my comment there, Stuart. As far as the timings from Canada Soccer and BC Soccer, we're still under the same timelines that we always have been. Granted, as this carries on further and further, we would adjust them to reflect the realities that we're in. But right now, we don't know exactly where we're going to land with the realities and what we're able to do and how quickly we can move to a phase 2 for soccer. And if it were up to all of us, I know we'd like to get to phase 2 as soon as possible so that we can have some clarity on the fall season for the coastal area. Stuart, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. In one of the questions that I asked previously, also with regard to that is, are you thinking about what will happen if there is a partial season and how that will affect fees?
Yeah, all those things are being discussed right now, and like I mentioned, is with the finance committee and ultimately the board. And even if there's a reduced player fee this year as a one-off to support clubs and members in order to get back onto the fields, that's all being discussed right now, and I can't really comment on it because I don't have any clarity from exactly on what it's going to look like. But all of those things are up for discussion and changing daily, just like it has been since the middle of March.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next question we have is from Gregor Young from Vancouver District.
Hello, everyone. Very glad to hear that there's already a pathway back to normal soccer through a phase 2 and a phase 3. I'm guessing that moving through those pathways will mainly be based on metrics provided by the Provincial Health Office in terms of cases going down. I'm just wondering though if there's things that we can do at the club or the league level to help describe and help explain how those levels could look in terms of what sort of soccer would be okay at phase 2 and what would be okay at phase 3. And maybe those are small-sided games, and maybe that's saying we're going to limit travel. Is there any idea around what we can do to facilitate moving through these levels to get us back to normal soccer?
Great question, Gregor. So similar to what we did previously, once we came out the gate on the situation, we surveyed out to everybody to gather information. That's also our plan moving forward, to gather information from the members and clubs on what would be reasonable considering the situation is different in every area. And so we're working on what that survey would look like in the questions, but it's similar to what you've said, is if it's small-sided games, what does that look like? What age groups do we need to adjust at older age groups that would normally be playing 11v11? Do they play 7v7 or 8v8 in the short-term period of time? One of the biggest challenges with that, and the conversations I've had with some club representatives and members as well, is it's a logistical issue as well because of the team roster sizes. And even if we're playing 11v11 or 8v8, if the roster sizes are the same, then those players are still at the field because they're on the sidelines. And what does that mean? So there's a lot of kind of moving parts here, but the short answer is we are going to reach out a similar type that we did previously with a survey and gather the information that way. That helped us greatly informing the current phase 1 plan that we rolled out, along with the support from Canada, ViaSport, and kind of the good practices that we gathered from across the sports system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Jason.
Next up, we have Jeff Clark from Surrey United again.
Thanks again. I can't let Jeremy from Lake Hill outdo me here, it seems. But my question had to do with what Gregor just asked in terms of like a mechanism for us to provide a sample. So if we are running some of the recommendations, like the theory to practice argument, maybe we can share that. So the answer you provided answered that. And I think I just wanted to speak to Jason DeVos' question or a comment about it's not a race to get back. Completely agree. We are seeing a lot of hesitation in registration and in members, and they've read what's on the website. They don't see how it's going to work. So we're going to create a sample of our most organized and manageable groups to start. So we can maintain the quality, we can maintain the standard as well, create a bit of a test, and then hopefully build out the curriculum based on recommendations that have been provided. But I'm just more concerned about, so Chris, go to the BC Soccer Charter, and when Paul Turner used to come do site visits, I'm just requesting maybe, and I know like especially in the short term, so take next week, if you had like a handful of groups that were returning, and then the majority would return in maybe week 3 or week 5, would it be possible to lean on BC Soccer's staff? It doesn't necessarily need to be technical staff, but for visibility, for to get someone out to the park to kind of give us a different perspective, another set of eyes, some speak to the organization, speak to the transition, whatever it is. And I think from a membership and like soccer community perspective, it will lend like great credence to this partnership, this collective, this we're all in this together. On the other side of our partners, we've actually contacted the city for presence from bylaws, and they've given us the support there. So they're going to have bylaws out a bit more just to assist with illegal play, people just jumping on the fields, or some of the parking flow changes that they're going to implement as well, just for drop off and pickup areas. So my question is, if we were to start, and there were a few groups all within your resources, would this be something that BC Soccer would entertain in terms of just having one of your staff even come out for, you know, a 30, 45 minute just to give us some feedback?
That's a great question, Jeff, and I appreciate the request for sure. Yeah, we can take that back and have a look at it. Earl, correct me if I'm wrong, we had 45 clubs gone through the assessment tool. So we have a number of groups that do want to get back at it across all areas of the province. And again, we got to be mindful that we're providing support for all of our members, and right now we're not able to travel. So we got to be mindful of that too, for those groups outside the Lower Mainland on the island, to not be able to provide that type of service. So yes, we can take that back and we'll see what we can figure out, Jeff.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for raised hands. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hands now, just to stay respectful of people's time and to maybe keep it within the hour. I see a couple more hands raised now. We have Ali from Surrey United.
Thanks, Ryan. I just want to ask a question building on what Jeff just walked through. When COVID hit, it's unprecedented. None of us knew how to deal with it. We were all sort of making decisions as we are today. They continue to talk about a second wave in the fall, and I'm wondering what lessons have been learned that can be applied at an earlier stage for this sport specifically. If that second wave hits, things get canceled, will there be some guidance around what clubs should do around refunds in these scenarios and other member-oriented problem solving that we've all reached out to one another for, but now we have a little bit more experience with, and maybe we've all learned some lessons that will keep us from fighting against each other in such a scenario.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that one. That's a great question. It has been very challenging. Obviously, none of us have gone through this process ever, and managing through it is challenging at every level. I think that's also some of the guidance we've gotten from not only the health authorities, but ViaSport and Canada Soccer, is to take things slowly and walk before we run, because of that concern that you've raised of potential issues coming at us in the fall, which may come. But what Canada Soccer has guided us on is that we would take a phased back approach. So let's say we are able to get to games in phase 2 in September, and then we're not in a situation, or when we enter a bad spot from a health perspective, is we would have to move back into a previous phase. What that looks like is very messy. It's, as Earl has said previously on calls with me, is it's easy to turn the light off and say it's all sanctioned, it's all done. It's slowly, gradually bringing it back up, and then also if we do need to take some step backs, what does that look like? So we've been having those types of conversations as well, and what guidance we can provide. Earl, I don't know if you want to comment on any of that.
Yeah, it is an excellent question, right? And there was a question raised on, I can't remember if it was Saskatchewan or Alberta a couple of days ago, that talked about indoor, right? Which is not necessarily a challenge you need to deal with in BC, but they were talking about planning as toward indoor session. Should we think about that? And the thought scares me to a degree, but the message that we gave back was it's never too early to plan and factor in these things, right? No one wants to see us move backwards. The challenge is going to be if we move backwards in certain regions and move forward in others, is going to be the challenge that we didn't face on March 13th. March 13th, when we shut everything down across the country, to your point, was an easy decision to make. How you unwind that decision becomes the challenge. And so what I don't want to have happen is have regional pockets across the country that are moving backwards while others are moving forwards. That is going to be an unruly situation to sort of handle. So Again, Jason mentioned it earlier on. I've mentioned it a handful of times. The idea of taking things relatively slow and moving through the processes so we don't find ourselves in that situation is the important part. But it is an excellent question, and one that I'm going to take away when we start to engage the EDs next week, the executive directors of the provinces, to start thinking about that question. So I appreciate it.
And also, I know, Heather, at ViaSport, you guys have worked with all the sports. Is there anything that you could share from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I would echo the same things that you're all saying, and what you're facing in soccer is obviously the same as what we're facing in all the different sports, and they may have a few different considerations based on what type of sport it is, but yeah, we're all kind of challenged with the same thing and navigating through it as we go. And Jason is a part of some of those groups to hear from what's happening with other sports. So certainly if there are things happening within different sports that he can bring back to soccer, then hopefully he'll hear about it through some of the channels that we've set up.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question comes from Sarah with Coquitlam Metro Ford.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Thank you guys. I kind of have two parts. So first, a bit of administration. Ryan, will this recording be sent to us after so we can share it with our board?
I'm not sure what's going to be happening with the recording afterwards. We're going to take it and look at what information comes from it. And then I don't think, maybe Jason, you can speak to this a bit better as to what the plans will be.
Yeah, Sarah, we can do that. We'll clean it all up and we'll make it look good. And I can't change my haircut, but yeah.
I may have just sent you a message about how tired you look. It was meant in the nicest way. Second part is it's not a race comment is definitely how the approach we're taking in our club. I know that with the Premier's announcement yesterday and saying soccer's back as of June 12th, I don't know if it would be helpful if BC Soccer, in one of their next memos that they put out, a reminder that not all clubs are going to be starting on June 12th, and nor are all municipalities going to be open for us to return to play for June 12th. Because it seems to be this feeling that we're all back as of tomorrow, and that's obviously not the case. So it might just be helpful just to help support us and to support the clubs that, you know, aren't able to start as of tomorrow or as of Monday. Just a reminder that not everyone is going to be, not everyone's going to be able to go. That might be helpful. So that's it.
Yeah, Sarah, definitely take that on board. And that's kind of along the lines of what we've been saying, is that there could be clubs also that don't want to operate under these terms and people may not want to play. So just to let everybody know as well is that, again, those that know me, I try not to be front and center. I don't want to be front and center. But I did do the global interview today. They asked, because again, the Premier's announcement and soccer's back. And exactly what you're saying is exactly what I said. I said that not all clubs are going to be back. The earliest that groups could be back, we said, was as of tomorrow. However, it's only if those groups are ready and if they can get onto the fields and they've done the steps. So along the lines of what you said, is whether they play that, I don't know. I don't control what clips they put out there, but I did put that in the interview today, but I'll take it on board for sure with a memo going out further.
Okay, thank you.
And next time you should share your screen, Sarah, so we can see you.
Next question we have is from Kevin with Cliff Avenue.
Hello. Just got a quick question regarding like the 50 players per field and like the enter and exits and this hand sanitizing at every field. Has BC Soccer, even Canadian Soccer, like have they done a trial run at a field with a group of players and parents and coaches on what that would look like, or how, if they've come across any unforeseen challenges? Because I mean the write-up, it's very detailed and it's brilliant, but everything can look good on paper. But is there any perhaps plan to do one yourselves? And maybe to Jeff Clark's point of, it's a confidence thing, right? Like people might not be registering at the moment because it's a confidence thing, not knowing what to expect, and perhaps even videotaping, like just a little highlight video of some of those guidelines that will be in place. Enter and exits and hand sanitizing stations and what those groups will look like, perhaps could get more players registering. That was just wondering if that was in the works.
Yeah, hey, Kevin. From a BC Soccer standpoint, we're not looking to do any further videos or resources around that. But I think, as you said, with what Jeff mentioned and what we've shared in our resources, if there is, some further individual discussions with clubs to say what does entrance and exit points look like specific to your field and your environment, we're there to provide some guidance before you hit it running on the field.
Right. Thank you.
And our last raised hand is Jeremy from Lake Hill.
I'd like to say that I did that just to beat Surrey, but I did it just to beat Surrey. Seriously though, on the subject of marketing, PR, and communications, there are any number of groups out there already doing soccer-related activities. Some of it's ad hoc, some of it's more hawk. That's not a word. But at the end of the day, they're largely the collection of unsanctioned groups. And they give us all a bad name and they make us all look bad. And some of us have to answer the questions from the municipality. So on that note, can I just ask that if BC Soccer is doing any more public communications about return to play, that maybe they give a plug to sanctioned BC Soccer clubs and affiliates, so that we can hopefully not only head off some of the possible negative publicity that we could get, but also maybe push some people towards those of us who are trying to do the best and do the right thing.
Yeah, short answer, yes, of course. So obviously all of our messaging is targeted to our members and our affiliated clubs for sure. And again, I don't want to kind of steal any thunder from Canada. I know they're working on kind of a marketing communication piece around return to play. So Earl, I don't know if you want to comment there with the work that Brad and his team is doing.
No, in fact, I've got to call with Brad after this. So I will find out more. But yes, the reason why we went out with the announcement that we did was because BC and PEI at the time were sort of at the front end of us opening soccer back up in the country, right? So we wanted to send that message out very quickly as it was starting to happen. We're probably going to be sending a series of messages as things start to open up across the country. And then right up until the end, who knows who that final province will be to open up. But we'll probably make another message at that point. But I would expect that there's going to be a series of discussions and announcements, all highlighting the fact that our association, our member associations, our provinces and territories are opening up. And Jeremy, your question made me laugh because it's a question that gets asked in 13 different areas across the country on a regular basis. And we think, and Jason I know is on board with this, both Jason DeVos and Elliot, I think one of the big distinguishing factors that separate sanctioned organized soccer is the fact that things like this get done with great efficiency, with great understanding toward the safety of our members and our participants. That safe soccer aspect, which which is why we've kind of bundled it into the Safe Soccer roster, is one of those great differentiating factors from what we do and what the unsanctioned world tends to do. So it's constantly a thing that we're working for.
Thanks.
Great. So just we're just 3 minutes past the hour. I want to respect everybody's time. I do appreciate it. What I will say is that, as we've mentioned in the past, if anyone want to have one-on-one sessions of questions and anything like that, please connect directly with Chris Sharoni. Contact him. He's the one that's going to be taking those and facilitating and bringing in any staff members needed for those discussions. And obviously from there, we can engage with Jason DeVos and his development team as well to support our members and clubs as well. So I'll say thank you for attending and thank you for all the work that you guys are doing. And I will pass it over to Kel just to wrap it up from our board. You're on mute, Kel.
Technology is wonderful, huh? Sarah, how was my haircut? Anyway, just a real thank you to Heather and Jason and Earl for joining us. It's kind of you to do that. And some great questions from this that I'm definitely going to take it back to our board. I do wish you to know that we are looking at all the questions that are being asked already. You know, we are worried about what it's going to look like in the future. Budgeting wise, we're like you, we are unsure what's going to take place. And I think our man in charge of finances has produced about 4 budgets this week, because as the scenery changes, we keep trying to adjust because we know we're accountable to our members. We want to make sure we can provide services for you going down the road. But we also know that if you don't have anyone sign up, we know that's going to change the outlook a whole bunch too. But I really wish you luck for those who are opening up. It's a bit of a dangerous time for us, because I think we got to get it right, because this is going to show what the next stage can be for us. So I'm pleased to hear, Jeff, and your question about being cautious in terms of developing it and getting going on it. So folks, I'm pleased we're back, but I know we've got a long way to go on that. And I really appreciate all you folks have done to take us to this stage.
Great. On that, I'll echo my thanks to Jason and Earl and Heather for joining us, and thank you all for attending. And we'll of course be in touch soon.